Welcome to week 8 of the From Linear to Circular London online program. I'm Seb, hosted a few of these sessions with you guys over the last 8 weeks from our learning team, in case you don't know me. And I'm joined today by Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, tell us what you do at the foundation. You might need to unmute yourself.
That's it. How many of these, and we still get it wrong, don't we? So I'm Rhaenyra. I think this is the third time that I've joined you guys on the London cohort. I lead the higher education programme and the schools and colleges programme at the foundation, which means that I work to try and get circular economy into the formal education sector from age 5 all the way up to professional learning. It's a really great opportunity to be here again today, and today we are joined by our big boss, the Foundation's Chief Executive Officer, Andrew Morley. It's always quite a privilege when you get to interview your own boss. Normally it is, in fact, the other way around. We're going to find out a bit more about Andrew, his really interesting background, the Foundation's ambitions, our vision, and much more. We've also had some really great questions in from you guys in the past week, so we're going to try and weave as many of those as we can in along the way.
I always like to say, Rhaenyra, that I don't have a boss, but perhaps I do. So before we get to Andrew, thank you to everyone who's been sharing their elevator pitches over the course of the last week. I've seen many of them: Segan, Ross, Ida, Giza, Antonio, Tom, Sophie, Malvina. Bonia or Bonia, so I'm probably saying your name wrong. Fantastic effort for actually doing the pitch in an elevator. That's exactly the sort of commitment we were looking for. Huge props to you. There are no prizes. Life is its own prize, and I think generally with that exercise, there's a lot of power, and it's probably one of the things we're going to talk about with Andrew a little bit today. Is there's a lot of power in practicing how you talk and elocute that basic idea, because with the circular economy, it's the basic idea that's really powerful. I guess we are using Zoom, as Rhaenyra showed us. You can still trip up on Zoom even if you're a pro on it. So what are some of those, just remind us of some of the key rules, Rhaenyra, for this session?
Thanks, Seb. And yes, well done to Bonia. I mean, I remember last week saying to Ilma that I thought that was quite a challenge to set for the London cohort. So just as a reminder, we're on Zoom, we're on a meeting. Please find the chat window and use the chat window to share your thoughts, ask your questions, and basically keep in touch with us throughout the webinar today. Keep those questions as relevant as possible, and we have a great team behind the scenes who will hopefully be able to answer as many of them as possible, or send them through to Seb and myself, and we'll be able to put them to Andrew.
And so we are today joined by Andrew. Andrew joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in 2013, initially to launch our business programs. And in 2014, he became chief executive. Previously, he was a global managing director at Accenture and partner with McKinsey & Company. I've now worked with Andrew for around 6 years. And I think that, the best thing I can sort of say, and I always say this about you, Andrew, and I hope you think it's a compliment, is that Andrew understands the kind of level and scale of innovation that is required in this shift. But his experience and background and some of the relations we have gives him quite a practical grounding in what it actually takes to do some of the things that we're talking about. So hopefully we're going to tap into some of that today. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Seb. Thank you for having me. And hi, everybody. Delighted to see you all online, and looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, Andrew. So we'll kick off. Can you tell us about your first encounter with the concept of the circular economy, and how did that lead to you leading the Ellen MacArthur Foundation?
Okay, let's see, 2012, I came across it. I was actually, I was a competitive sailor in one of my past lives, and had been tracking Ellen's performance on the Vendée Globe in 2000, and then again when she did the Round the World event. So I knew of Ellen as a yachtswoman and an incredibly successful sailor, and she just popped up on one of my email feeds or social feeds, and I just was having a bit of a look to see what she was up to. The circular economy came up. I went to the website. There was a job. They were looking for somebody to come in to lead up the the business programs of the circular economy. And, you know, I'd been a management consultant for many, many years and was in a position where I was sort of interested and intrigued at other stuff. And this sort of popped up and was really, really very interesting. And I hadn't, I'd been interested in, you know, sustainability and environmentalism peripherally as an individual for probably, you know, 30 years. When I came across the circular economy idea, as Ellen was articulating it, I thought it was really, you know, an amazing sort of reframing of the opportunity space, and something that really was a really, you know, extraordinary idea that I felt had legs. And I felt that it was also something that I understood, as Seb said, I understood from my sort of experience over 30 years as a management consultant in business. I felt that I could contribute to, and had a pretty detailed understanding of the challenges that business has in transforming itself and understanding sort of global economics. And I had worked over the years in many, many markets for many of the world's leading companies, and had operated at a board level, and you know, could really sort of join the dots a bit with a cracking idea and an intersection with a possibility for engaging business and bringing a new economic construct into the world at a scale that you know, I felt would have a possibility of matching the scale of the demands, the challenges that sort of exist that it addresses. And for me, that was very intriguing. So I got in touch with Ellen and Jamie Butterworth, who was the CEO at the time, and had a first conversation with Ellen while I was in a really pretty crappy hotel in Delaware working for a pharmaceutical client on a rainy day. And basically at the end of the call, I said, I'll come down to Cowes and meet you and have a conversation, you know, on my ticket, and let's see where it goes. And that was it. We're off.
And here you are.
Here I am.
And I guess you've kind of hinted there a little bit that, you know, there's something about this power of the idea, and then there's something about the actual real traction and application of it. And that, in some ways, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as an institution can be quite hard for people to work out sometimes. The sort of combination of things that we do, the mix of people and organizations we interact with, is an unusual cocktail in some ways. So my question to you, Andrew, is what does the Ellen MacArthur Foundation do?
Well, we do really three things. We develop and promote the idea of the circular economy, and we engage and inspire the key actors in the economy to move, and we mobilize global scale solutions to demonstrate what's possible. That's what we do. And we have an approach, we've developed an approach which is different. And we did that quite deliberately. I mean, we came, as I said, the notion of sustainability, environmentalism, the notion of it's a systemic challenge has been around for 30 years. We've had many people talk about the need for systems thinking, the need for, you know, a different system, but we've never really cracked the approach for mobilizing and scaling system solutions. And that's what we really set out to do. And you know, system solutions are complex. It's not one company, it's not one organization. It can't be, you can't change a system as a company or as a business. And it's actually quite hard to change and transform a system as a government, particularly if it's a global system, because you need many governments to actually sort of line up on the same vision and journey. So we recognize this complexity, and we actually built the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in a way that in some respects reflects that complexity. So we work in business, we work in governments and cities and institutions, we work in learning, we work in design and innovation, we work in large-scale systems initiatives like the Plastics Initiative, and we work in communications. We do insights and analysis work, so we do our own research. We're very analytic and research-based. but we also know that we need to engage people through telling stories and bringing ideas to life in a way that they can actually connect with. So we created a complex organization to actually deal with a complex set of challenges.
Thanks, Andrew. We're going to talk a little bit more about systems in a while, but I mean, you know, you've said what it is that we do, and that kind of sounds massive. So I guess it would be great if you could just focus in a little bit and really talk through what are our kind of goals and what are our core focus areas as we head into the rest of 2020 and moving forward.
Well, you know, obviously 2020's been somewhat disrupted by the pandemic, and it is really interesting to reflect on what we've learned through the pandemic, because in many ways this was a global challenge that had been recognized for many years. We've been talking about the risk of global pandemics for 10 years at least. And if you go back, I saw a great social media photograph a little while back that had Time magazines from I think about 2012, a series of about 8 Time magazine covers, forecasting and saying, we've got a global pandemic coming, we really need to get onto this. And, look what happened. We actually had one, and shut down the entire global economy, has had massive, huge health implications and economic implications. And it's not as if we weren't warned, and it's not as if we didn't have the science and the predictions and all that stuff, but we didn't do anything about it. And now we are where we are. So it's really interesting to sort of reflect on that and think of all of the other global challenges that are really very profound and massive, very well documented, loads of science, loads of evidence, loads of warnings, loads of initiatives to try to mobilize, but we haven't mobilized very well yet. I mean, we're on the journey with climate, but, we could look at water, we could look at food systems, we look at, social challenges that we've got. So I think that, it's 2020 is a really special moment. And I think that we are sort of working really hard as an organization to understand what's happened in the last 3 or 4 months, which has been really quite profound. We've seen, a huge shift in buying patterns, public engagement on systems like Zoom and on virtual meetings. I mean, it's a massive shift. And we've seen global supply chains react. We've seen governments mobilize, trillions or many hundreds of billions of dollars in a world where we said, we don't have the money for transformational efforts. We just magicked it up out of nowhere instantly. So it's really interesting. And, we're taking all of that on board, and we're, determined to come out of the pandemic even stronger than we went into it. And the foundation has had quite a successful run at mobilizing the idea of a circular economy. We've also mobilized specific initiatives such as plastics, fashion, and food. We're now working in finance. We have the C100. We've got an incredible network. All of that stuff is more relevant than ever, as is the solution framework. And we sort of laid out our ambition over the next 5 years to say, we're shifting from the mobilization of an idea to the scaling of it and the mainstreaming of the circular economy into the global agenda. And nothing's changed in terms of that vision and objective for 2025. But what we're able to do now, I think, as a result of the pandemic, is to say, how do we come back from the pandemic and represent the circular economy not only as a solution for many of the challenges, but it also represents an incredible opportunity to transform economically and to create new growth that is better growth, that actually is restorative, regenerative, and addresses many of these challenges as a byproduct.
And I mean, I've one of the, almost all of my engagements with people, especially in this program, they have a very positive view of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But as I kind of mentioned in my first question, sometimes they find it a little bit tricky to work out us, like what do we do? And I find that story that you kind of told, and you did this in a team meeting, a foundation at one stage as well, the kind of the pandemic warnings, there's films made about it, everything that we would have wanted to achieve for the topic of climate change or water or the circular economy, whichever of the big issues you're kind of is your thing. in many ways was achieved with a pandemic. And so one of my reflections is always, in some ways, it's good for us to be deliberately different and accept that a lot of the mechanisms that people expect you to take don't work, because we don't know how to do this deliberately.
Well, I think that's right. First off, it's not really about us. I mean, it doesn't really matter if people don't understand what we do at the foundation so much. It's more about what the outcome is and what is mobilized, and how we get to a circular economy faster. I mean, our mission as an organization is to accelerate the circular economy, and our belief is that it's an inevitability, really, and it's a solutions framework that is able to offer solutions that address many of the macro trends that we see in the world around us. So, it's all about the idea. We're all about the idea. And as I said before, we can see that many of the approaches that we've had to sustainability, to environmentalism, to mobilizing systems change simply haven't worked. And we need to really force ourselves collectively to find new approaches for mobilizing scale solutions. And there's a lot of organizations that spend a lot of time on awareness building and really quantifying the problem and looking at how incremental solutions or incremental ways of sort of responding to that. And I think what we have tried to do a little bit differently is to say, how do we step back and say, could we innovate in everything that we do to actually drive scale solutions that actually shift systems in a way that actually respond to the magnitude of the challenges that we face. And there's no doubt that the challenges of 3 billion new middle class consumers entering the market over the next 10 years essentially busts the system. We can't continue to grow in the way that we have in the past using extractive economic models that externalize all the damage and exploit, labor forces and labor arbitrage and exploit regulatory gaps and loopholes, etc. That just doesn't work when you add 3 billion extra people into that mix. And we have to find new approaches that actually create value and build natural capital.
I mean, Andrew, you've talked a lot about it being a global mission. The pandemic is global, and there's a lot of use of the word global. And one of the questions that we've had in during the week from one of our participants, Madhu, has reflected on a global mission, but has asked the question around how do we visualize the foundation's work in developing countries? We do a lot, and we talk a lot about what's happening in Western Europe, within the United States, and I think increasingly throughout these webinar series, we've had a lot of questions around what it is that we do on that truly global scale. And as you were talking about labor markets and supply chains, and developing countries have a huge part to play in that. So I was wondering if you'd like to reflect a little bit on where you think the foundation is going to go in its work with developing countries.
Well, I mean, I think first off, to put it in perspective, the foundation is 10 years old this year. What we set out to do was to mobilize the idea of a circular economy. It didn't exist 10 years ago in the marketplace. I mean, we've essentially brought it to the world. And now if you do a Google search, when I joined, I did it, what everybody does, and I did, a lot of Googling, and there was about 150 references on the internet about the circular economy, and most of it was to do with industrial ecology in China. Now, if you do a search on Google, you'll get, hundreds of millions of references, and the world has mobilized that idea. And we set out to do that 10 years ago. We also set out to demonstrate, how we could shift systems, and we can perhaps come back to the plastic story if you want to a little later. But, over the last 10 years, we've done at least two things as an organization. We've put circular economy on the map, and we've put the plastics agenda on the global map. And the plastics agenda is a developed and developing market challenge. So we are, in fact, influencing in developed and developing markets. But more broadly, we're about 150 people in the foundation. We aim to work through our network as much as we do directly in what we do. We have an extraordinary network of relationships. Most of them, as you point out, are in Europe and the US, but increasingly in Asia, etc. But many of these organizations are multinational companies and organizations that operate in developing markets. So we're getting some influence in those markets, and we're very clear in our work that we need to design system solutions and product service systems that are appropriate to context. It's very different designing product service solutions for Africa or developing markets than it is in the USA or Europe or parts of developed Latin America. So context is super important. We work with actors and influencers who have global reach. We do a lot of this type of thing where we are actually opening our thinking up to the world, open access. So there's a tremendous amount of materials and insights and increasingly multilingual on our websites, etc. So we're trying to do all of that. I think over time we're forming relationships in developing markets. We're doing some work in Africa at the moment, looking at food. We've certainly got activities going on in Latin America, and those will undoubtedly grow. We're very active in China. So, we have somewhat of a global footprint, but we're a small, young organization. And
I mean, that kind of like, so how do we scale this thing is kind of like the ultimate question. And very often, we get that, you tell people how amazing the progress has been, you get people excited about the idea, and then you get the kind of scale question. Of course, we are just one organization, and we want other organizations to be actively engaged in the topic in order to drive it forward. But actually, it might be a good time to kind of, we've talked a bit about our approach to systems change. We talked a bit about the sort of rifeness of the terminology of we need systems change in various sectors. And indeed, we probably, I wouldn't like to do like a transcript and count up all the times the word systems has been mentioned in this webinar series alone. Plastics is an interesting example for us of how we've tried to go about it. And I wonder whether you could give us the story of that, Andrew, because it kind of started, as I understand it, as just a conversation with some CEOs at Davos one year, and now it's exploded into this huge initiative and topic.
Yeah, I'll do that. I just wanted to come back to one point just before I dive into that. It just, on this pace of change and adoption, we're 10 years into what I would say is probably a 30-year journey of global transformation, possibly 20. But this is a major macro shift. If you look at the internet and you look at the evolution of the internet, it was the standards and the vision was created in the 80s. It took quite a lot of time for it to be adopted, and then it took off. We got the foundations built, and then it just radically took off. That was a 25-30 year journey actually. And what we're talking about is a fundamental shift in the operating system of the economy. So it's going to take a while, but the early signals are good. Plastics, just coming back to that, was really interesting for us because we talk about mobilizing a shift in global economics, which is a massively complex system. And what we know from systems change is that we learned actually through our research and just trying to work through how to approach it. You've got to find an entry point to a complex system. You can't take it all on at once. We chose plastics as an example of a global material flow back in 2012. In our second report, in fact, we looked at plastics packaging. We then picked it up and said, okay, let's pick some examples of high volume, low value materials that are global in their material flows nature, and let's have a look at how we could apply the circular economy thinking to that. And we chose plastics back then as a worked example. And what we found when we first got into it, there was almost no data or information available on the global stocks and flows of plastics. There was almost no data on the true extent of leakage of plastics into the natural environment, although we all sensed it and we had beach cleanups and all that stuff, but there was no data on it. And there was absolutely no forward-looking view of the implications of a leaky global system such as plastics. It just didn't exist. We had a conversation with a dozen CEOs in 2013 in Davos, and we said, look, we're really interested in plastics. It's pretty intriguing. It's part of, it's the workhorse of the modern economy, but we really don't know much about it. And it was interesting because I spoke to the then CEO of Unilever, and he said, yeah, we're really interested too. We put, 2 billion pieces of packaged consumer goods on the market every day of the year. We touch 2 billion customers a year. We know this stuff's a problem, but we can't fix it. We as one of the world's largest consumer goods packaging companies only have 2% of the volume on market. It's a very long tail, and it is massively fragmented across every country or city that you go to. Everybody approaches this entirely differently. And it's massively different from developed to developing markets. So, and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. Here is a material that we all totally depend on. We know not much about it, and we know that it's, massively problematic. So we spent nearly 2 years trying to convince someone to give us some money to actually work this out. We got started, and I was going around to various scientific meetings and meetings with people looking at ocean plastics waste, etc. And it was just sort of some data was starting to emerge. And we mobilized this piece of research with the objective of understanding the system globally, which had never been done before, but also coming up with a solutions approach for actually addressing what we knew was a problem. And that was what we released in Davos in 2016 at the Davos meeting of the World Economic Forum. And we called the report The New Plastics Economy. We released it there. And we actually, as part of that report, did that analysis to say, okay, what are the implications of this leaky system? And we came up with a quote that by 2050, we would have more plastics in the ocean than fish on business as usual. And we had all the analysis behind that, and that headline was picked up and promoted around the world, and it got more media coverage than any report ever released at the World Economic before in its history. And on the basis of that, we were able to start to engage with the world's leading companies on a 3-year effort to design a new approach, a new vision, a new approach for transforming the global plastics sector. Fast forward to now, we have over 800 of the world's leading companies working with us. We're working in a dozen countries around the world. We have a common vision. We have a set of targets for 2025. We have transparency in terms of the volumes on market. And we're making real progress because the world has woken up to the plastics challenge as an example, just one example of the implications of a linear economy and the approach, the new approach that we need to take for addressing that. And so for us, that was a really interesting journey that has played out, pretty well so far.
I mean, Andrew, I think, some of the things that we've achieved have been quite phenomenal. And I'm going to refer back to the article that we had in the Financial Times this weekend, which I think was a really great achievement to have so many global leaders really affirming their commitment to taking the circular economy forward. Perhaps you'd like to reflect a little bit, and you've talked about COVID-19, but why is there so much momentum at such a high level for circular economy at the moment?
Well, this pre-existed the pandemic, and it's like every now and again, actors and rock stars become an instant success, and they say, well, it's a 10-year overnight success, right? We've been working with these CEOs and these organisations for 10 years. And we had a meeting in Davos in January this year that was really quite a game changer in that we are now in the position collectively to have a narrative about a systems change that is an economic narrative and represents new economic opportunity and growth, but it also delivers against these global challenges. If we deliver the circular economy and we change the way we produce and use products and materials, that's about, and food, that's about 45% of the 1.5 degree climate target that we have. we can't get to the 1.5 degrees unless we do this. Renewable energy and renewable energy efficiency is only 55% of the answer. So we had that before we came into Davos, before we came into the pandemic. And it's really interesting that, as we start to see this narrative of build back better, take the opportunity of what we're learning through this pandemic and applying it to transformation of business models, the massive public investment in the economy to reignite it, to re-kickstart it. We don't want to reignite and kickstart a turbocharged linear economy. It's really clear that we have to use this moment to transform and to take this investment and shift it to a better model. And all of those people who co-signed that statement are absolutely on board with that and are committed to it. And this is not just a statement of promise. Behind that statement, in pretty much everybody that was on that statement has committed to very aggressive targets over the next 5 years, and to the ability to report and have transparency of progress against those targets. And what's really interesting is that we've seen in the last 5 years plus the mobilization of finance globally towards better investment. So if you look at what ESGs, environmental, sustainable and governance investment approaches, there's a class of investment called ESG, that has grown in the last 10 years or so from nothing to a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. So investors are institutionally, pension funds, large sovereign investors are looking for ways in which they can invest in the new economy that's coming. And ESG is a representation of that. And we're now starting to see, investors demanding from companies for them to show that they're actually contributing to climate change solutions. But we're also starting to see them starting to look for other measures of investment classes. And we're working on these with our initiative called Circulytics and our metrics and the partnership we have with BlackRock, which is the world's largest investor, asset manager globally, and many other banks and financial institutions to say, how do we orient finance behind the leading companies that are not only making these statements, but also actually delivering against them? And how do we actually create a positive reinforcing mechanism to make that happen? So, the FT article on Saturday was one of, many things that we're going to be doing over the next, several months and years to keep reinforcing those leading organizations and reorienting towards these systems transformations. And I think what you'll see is that, those businesses that signed that statement collectively have invested hundreds of billions of dollars in this transformation. So this is a reality. It's not, it's not a hollow statement anymore, and it's not something that is going to go away. This is a fundamental shift that's going on that people are getting behind.
We had a couple of questions coming through in the chat about accountability, which I think once you've got something to comment, how do you keep them accountable, which I think you've kind of addressed in your response there, Andrew. And I loved what you said earlier about, we just didn't have the information about plastics. And that's one of those things that kind of highlights the challenge of it, because, a lot of these companies we're talking about are remarkable examples of innovation and expertise on what they do. But what we're talking about is a fundamentally different way of the economy working and redesigning it differently from the start. And they're not experts on that. And that kind of links, I guess, to a question we had in advance of this from Z, where they asked, what is the greatest challenge for companies in that transition to a circular economy? Is it technical know-how, feasibility, willingness to change? What are some of the challenges?
Well, if you look at any of these global companies, any of these large incumbents, just pick one, and you look at what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. These companies, these businesses invest capital in the creation of production systems that, they're multi-year investments. they apply incredible technology to be able to produce products and services at scale and to replicate that model globally. Companies are very good at, scaling ideas. They're very good at optimizing and at efficiency. So, you'll see an idea, you'll see a product emerge, you'll see it start to grow, you'll see the industrial engineers and the systems designers and the management science and the marketing and everything else play in to scale that idea. And that takes, it takes a lot of investment in time. And you look at these large multinationals which have, huge investments in these types of systems globally. And, whatever you think of them, whatever you think about a can of baked beans, whether that's healthy nutrition, it's the right answer or not, at the moment, it's a crucial part of our food system. It's a crucial part of, the economic model we live in. And we've got to actually shift from that type of model to a very different type of product service design, a different sourcing of materials, a different production method in many ways that's more distributed. We've got to be able to design solutions for people that meet their needs efficiently and cheaply and easily. The narrative, the discussion used to be about we need to change consumer behavior and they'll demand different products. That's nonsense. We have to innovate products that meet people's needs in a way that makes it super easy for people to be part of a system that works. I've been working on plastics for 10 years and I stand in my kitchen and I'm clueless, what is this thing I'm holding in my hand? What do I do with it? It's really hard. And we have to make it so easy that actually it would be harder to work against a better system than to be part of it. And that's sort of to do that requires design, it requires innovation, it requires materials innovation, service innovation, it requires digital innovation, it requires systems engineering. We need to rethink value chains. We need to rethink supply chains. We need to work with governments to help us to get infrastructure and regulation in place that enables this to happen. It's complicated and it's a massive shift, but we've seen, and we can point to literally thousands of examples that are emerging in incumbent companies. The big companies are doing it now and they will scale it quickly, but also in challengers and disruptors who, every now and again will go big, whether it's Uber, Airbnb, pick your favorite disruptor that's gone large. Every now and again, they'll go big, but there's loads and loads of smaller local ones as well. And it has to operate at both of those scales.
I wonder if you might want to just elaborate a bit more on the role of SMEs. We've had a question in from Mandy Burton, and we've talked, you talked a lot about scale and large companies and systemic change at a global level. But what role do we see small to medium-sized enterprises playing in this global transition to a circular economy?
A huge role. And scale doesn't mean we need monolithic multinationals. Scale means we need hundreds of thousands of SMEs that are part of that ecosystem. And I think for SMEs, being an SME is hugely challenging. In this business environment, it's challenging for everybody. If you're an SME, you haven't got much time to transform your business. It's hard to do that. You need to have some support in some ways. So, the role of government in enabling a more distributed, SME-based, high street re-emergence is really important. We need an ecosystem of actors in the economy that are both large and small, and they both are important. And, I think that what we're doing as an organization is we are creating the vision and the tools, open source, for SMEs to access, but we're orienting most of our sort of partnering activity with the larger players because they've got the time and the resources to do it, and they have the reach and the investment possibilities. And, these are the actors that will have scale impact globally, but we want to empower distributed, diverse and inclusive economics through SMEs, through startups, through developed and developing markets. It's all crucially important and it all represents part of the scale.
And you mentioned some of those big organizations we work with, Andrew. We had a question in advance, which again is quite a common question we get asked. You know, obviously we work with organizations that are part of the problem today, and a lot of people are concerned about greenwashing. Are you concerned about greenwashing or the sort of, I don't know, the
Well, I'm concerned about
intentions
lots
of
of
companies?
things. I mean, you know, if you're trying to change a system, there's plenty to worry about. And whether it's greenwashing or whether it's, you know, political economics, whether it's, you know, social issues, whether it's popularism, all of this stuff, whether it's environmental, you know, climate challenges through bushfires or through, you know, cyclones and hurricanes, all of those things are a worry, right? Now, you know, what we do is we work with global leading companies who are demonstrating their investment and commitment to this. They are part of the problem. They know they're part of the problem. We're all part of the problem. You know, it's very, very hard to point to, you know, pristine circular economy, you know, examples. They're typically small startups that haven't scaled. Anybody that's part of the linear economy is currently part of the problem. Everybody needs to shift. And, you know, I think what we need to do collectively is to build directional momentum and to put the transparency in and to, you know, track performance and to call it out and to promote the leading companies who are really making progress. You know, we need to get behind the ones that are really making this happen and to get others to do more of it.
Andrew, thank you for answering so many questions so nicely. We've had quite a lot of questions, not only in this webinar, but in previous webinars, around the links between circular economy and things like racial injustice, social inequality, economic inequality. And I guess, you know, we've said that we will put this question to you. Where do you see circular economy's role in helping deal with some of these big global issues and deal with inequalities?
Well, I think it, you know, comes back to the comment I made earlier on that, you know, if you look at the history of economic development over the last, say, 200, 300 years, what we have seen universally is an approach that has been extractive, consumptive, exploitative. We have either through historically through things like colonialism or slavery, we have actually engaged in a form of labor arbitrage and exploitation that has been in many ways evolved over the years into the linear economy we have today, you know, which is a globalized economy that says, you know, we're going to arbitrage labor costs in developing markets. We're going to arbitrage weaker regulation in developing markets to offshore our pollution or our, you know, problematic production methods. We are continuing to see labor exploitation, whether it's through modern slavery or whether it's through extractive economics that is stripping the, you know, the soul out of many communities through extractive economics. I mean, these are all examples of a model that we've not taken a perspective on until very recently that says, now we have transparency. You know, we are able to engage in an understanding of what's going on in a way that we've never been able to do before globally. So we're able to see the extent of the externalized pollution that we're creating. We're able to see the extent of the climate impact, the devastation of natural habitat and diversity of species, water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, until very recently, we all, you know, we felt societally that the world was so big and so bountiful in resources that, relatively speaking, it wasn't so much of a problem. We were making progress and, you know, all that stuff was, yes, you know, it's going on, but we can deal with it. We now know that we can't, you know, we can't, society is no longer going to tolerate racial discrimination and social discrimination and gender and all of these things. We're just not going to tolerate it anymore because we have transparency. And And in many ways, I think that the good and bad aspects of the digital revolution and social media are playing out in a way that, where I say, you could argue that we're really sort of on the verge of a new epoch of enlightenment, really, that is presenting new possibilities for the way in which we can evolve societally and economically. And at the root of this, it's about, the economy. That's why we talk about the circular economy, not the circular sustainable solution. We're about the economy because it's at the heart of everything. And the economy needs to actually serve society, and it needs to serve the betterment of humanity. And unless we actually are able to collectively reorient the way in which we view this, we're going to continue to have, the mobilization on the streets. We're going to continue to have this sort of societal fracture that we've got now, the popularism and the sort of, incredibly complex and disturbing economic and political situations that we've got globally, until we actually get to the root cause of this, which is, largely about an economic system that serves humanity in a way that is societally appropriate and actually treats the ecosystem as part of the system that we have to actually develop. We're going to continue to have this sort of turbulence, but I think the times are changing. I think we're seeing a sort of mobilization now that isn't going to tolerate a reversion to, brushing it under the carpet.
A new epoch of enlightenment, Andrew. I think I might make that my Twitter bio description.
Add it to your list, Seb.
And I guess like the thread that kind of sits under a lot of that holds some of these issues together is that ability. We talked about it earlier on, the kind of how do you actually deliberately disrupt things that are systemically embedded, because we haven't had that knowledge, and a lot of these challenges are very systemic in nature, and developing those skills and that thinking in our society and across our economy is really powerful, whichever part you're focused on at any one time.
Well, yeah, look, and I think that this is what the challenge is, actually. We need a new approach to be able to mobilize and scale systems that can work. And, there's quite a lot packed into that statement, because it's, it's work for who, it's work for what. It's about a system that works. We need to create intergenerational value through our economic activity. The more economic activity we have, the more successful business is, the better society and the environment should become, not the other way around. And I think that's what we're trying to actually mobilize, is this shift, and to actually get all the incredible knowledge and capability and innovation potential and all that stuff oriented towards solutioning in a way that delivers intergenerational value rather than extracting value that is destructive.
Andrew, we've got a really fantastic group of people listening in on the webinar, and who we hope will go out there and be pioneers of the circular economy once this series is over. And we've had a really great question in, which is, what will be the most important personal characteristic for a future circular leader of tomorrow? What is necessary to lead the transition? I think that's a really great question. What can we send our webinar participants away with in terms of thinking about that leadership characteristics?
Well, I think that this is a challenge that requires a new approach. I think that the approach needs to be systemic. That is, you need to think in systems. You need to think in terms of how do I create solutions that deliver value in the round for the various dimensions of the ecosystem that you operate within. So the leaders of the future are going to need to truly value the systems thinking, the notion of better distributed, inclusive, diverse economics, as opposed to a narrower view of success. So, you know, I would encourage people to really try to engage in an understanding not only of systems, you know, whether it's ecosystems, biological ecosystems, technical systems, networks. Try to, you know, engage in thinking about systems, engage in thinking about systems dynamics. We know that we can actually trigger positive shifts in systems if we get the dynamics right. So you know, be a systems thinker, but also be a systems solution player. You need to be thinking, you know, not just about understanding the system, but how you engage with it in order to shift it and to create system solutions. And I think I just you know, bring it back to your personal experience. How do you create economics that you would want to engage in that make it easier for you to be part of a better system? And there's so many examples, you know, in your everyday life where you come across systems that simply don't work. And we need to orient back to, you know, creating systems that work for people.
Thank you, Andrew, so much. I have one final question for you. It should just, and I guess it, you know, we've talked about COVID a little bit. We've talked about some of the momentum. Your feeling about the kind of momentum behind circular economy coming out of COVID-19, you know, people will be concerned, is this agenda going to be dropped? Yeah, what's the sort of word on the grapevine, as it were?
Well, you asked for feeling. So my feeling is that, you know, the circular economy is more relevant than ever. There is no way, I mean, my view is that the circular economy is an inevitability. And, you know, the question is, you know, how fast and how quickly will it be taken up and scaled? And I hope that, you know, everybody on this call is really somewhat inspired by a mission that says, how do we bring that inevitability towards us as fast as possible? You know, and I think that's what the challenge is. This is, you know, my feeling is that there is no way that the circular economy is doing anything other than exploding as an idea. And, you know, the pandemic just makes it more relevant than ever. And I think it's going to just really start to go exponential pretty quickly.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. Thank you everyone for asking the questions, for putting Andrew under this examination that we've delivered over the last 50 minutes or so. Always good, and hopefully some questions answered. This is the part of the session where I ask you guys to do something, because this isn't all about us giving you stuff. This is also about your inputs and you sharing. So the homework for week 8 is to ignore the bit where it says week 7 in the middle of the text. That's just me making an error. But week 8 is to watch the film called Circular Economy documentary called System Reset. We've got some provocation questions for you. We'll share the link to the film. It's a great film that ties together some of this systems thinking dynamic and looks through the lens of cities in particular. Some really good speakers featured in there, including Alicia Garmalevich and others from the materials side as well. So make sure you check that out. Rhaenyra, what can we expect next week?
Next week, Seb, everyone is in for an absolute treat. If you don't know who Hunter Lovens is, go and look her up. I was lucky enough to hear her in a webinar last week, and she is going to be talking to you all about regenerative agriculture. She is bold, she's in your face, she's direct, she will tell it like it is, but you will absolutely love next week with Hunter. She really is an absolute treat, and she's a really accomplished woman with some really great insights on how we can deliver circular economy through agriculture and what that means for the energy and regenerative agriculture sector. So hope you tune in and enjoy that next week.
I feel like, Rhaenyra, we need to have a debate about how you say her surname, because I would say Lovens and you say Lovens. Maybe she'll tell us next week. Maybe Andrew has a deciding vote on that one.
Yeah, no, it's
English. I'm South African. She's American.
Lovins as in loving, not Lovins. No, yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Also next week, we have a Zoom networking experiment. We've actually done a little bit of Zoom networking. So next Thursday, again, details of this will be shared in the Slack channel. A chance to get together at 5:15 BST next Thursday. Breakout rooms, depending where you're in the world. It could be your dinner, lunch, breakfast, drinks break. and we'll just chat and get to know each other a bit better in a friendly setting. So if you can join us for that, details will be posted in the Slack. Then the other thing you'll be receiving this week, which I know many of you on the call will be keen to hear about, is this kind of assignment piece that, as you know, there's a second phase to this program, and there is a selection process that we talked about at the beginning. This is just a heads up on it. You will be getting an email about it. The details will be posted in the Slack. There'll be directions for all your questions. So please don't, basically I'm asking you, don't send us any questions about this until at the earliest Monday, when we've had a chance to send you the information around. It should get to you sometime tomorrow. But we're going to be asking you to respond to these 2 questions in a format mostly of your choice. All these details will be sent to you, but that's just a heads up. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you next week.
Cheers, everybody.